Out of the 5,000 people who ran up to the Yukon, maybe 5 found gold. But the money was made by the people who sold the shovels, the tents.
You know, bias is a big part of life. You have a preordained opinion of someone, and very often those biases are built up over many years. My guest today is Perry Miele, and my biases about him is he's too good at everything.
So it's got to start somewhere. And you know me, the glass is usually half full in my mind every day when I wake up.
This guy could have been Prime Minister of our country. He's an extraordinary entrepreneur. He's a mentor and a muse for so many individuals that I know and admire.
Getting us all feeling more positive, more inspired to invest in companies, in growth, in people.
A guy's guy, loves fishing, smoking a cigar, telling stories, but when he's surrounded with mixed company at the same time, he somehow comes out as Prince Charming. So
immigrants that when you grew up, you saw your parents had energy and passion when all the odds were stacked up against them, language, culture, you name it. Everything was working against them, but they never quit. How can you not learn from that?
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated.
Lots of bias, maybe a little bit of jealousy, but I'm very pleased to have my friend Perry Miele join me. And I promise at the end of this interview, you two will have formed some pretty positive thoughts about this young man. So Perry, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
You know, I feel the same way about you. I call you Captain Canada, and you inspire me to be more pro-Canadian and stay focused on the things that are going to make our life better here. So thanks for having me on.
You know, Perry, we're going to get into this incredible career you've had and this how you sort of gone from politics into entrepreneurship. But what I don't really know about you is who was Perry Miele as this kid growing up, and what kind of nightmare you must have been to your family because your energy level is unmatched.
Yeah, there's no question I was a challenging child, but I grew up in Thunder Bay. I mean, as you know, it was a great upbringing. We were in a small town and my parents were immigrants. They had come from Italy when they were in their late teens, early 20s. And so it was a different upbringing. I think those values that were imposed and taught at an early age and the challenges just made me, energetic and gave me the drive and excitement for life that I take into what I do every day.
You know, Perry, I'm always curious about immigrants and the first generation and being around where nothing's guaranteed, you can take nothing for granted. Is that one of the most beautiful, important lessons you could have had at an early age that says, if you want to make your destiny a matter of choice, you got to go out and do it?
It's more passion. I think that's what comes out of the early immigrants, that when you grew up, you saw your parents had energy and passion when all the odds were stacked up against them, language, culture, you name it. Everything was working against them, but they never quit. How can you not learn from that? How can you not move on to your life and take those lessons that if you have the same passion and drive they do and never, and I repeat, never give up, good things will eventually work out for you. And I think those are the lessons that we all take from that.
But the wealth that you've created intellectually, emotionally, and also financially, did you have an ability to share the same lessons with your kids?
I think it's more challenging for the next generation if we've already created that. And so the only way you can do it is continue to share those values. My kids were exposed to my parents at a very early age. They spent time with them. And hopefully some of those lessons from my mother and father paid off. But I don't have an easy answer for that one, because I think our kids, besides them growing up in, let's say, a more successful environment, there's other challenges that they have to deal with besides managing that. They grew up in the AI world. They've grown up in the digital world. They, like you and I, never had that. So I'm more concerned about how they take on those challenges, and are we equipping them to be innovators.
We're going to get back to talking about our, the future of Canada and what we need to do with our youth. But let's go back to your youth. Like very early on, one of the paths that looked like you were going to own for a lifetime was politics. You worked in the Canadian federal government. You're chief of staff and the Minister of International Trade during NAFTA negotiations. So what got you involved in politics at such an early age? And what lessons did you learn there that you carried forward?
Yeah, I think some of my biggest lessons, it still guides what I do every day. And it started with my father. I was 12 years old and my dad had supported a candidate and he had us out, putting lawn signs up, knocking on doors, holding rallies. You get bit by the political bug at the age of 12, 13, 14. That's it. You're committed forever. There's something to probably put all that energy toward. But the lessons from politics that you apply to the real world is very much understanding human behavior. Because in politics, if you don't understand human behavior, you will not get elected. You will not have a chance to tell your story and implement government policy in a way that you think will benefit others. And then the other one, people often ask, what did we learn when we were actually in government? When you went to cabinet, you didn't show up with a new policy and not know where the votes were. You spent your time seeding the ideas. You made sure that when your cabinet minister showed up with a big policy initiative, those other cabinet ministers were well aware of it. We knew where they stood, and hopefully we had their support. Think of when we went to pitches and ad campaigns and we were up against other agencies. You never wanted to go in front of that committee and pitch your new ideas without knowing all the personalities, having some relationship with them in some fashion. And between advertising and politics and government, there's some incredible lessons that can be applied right across the board.
So what made you leave the political arena? Because you were certainly fast tracking, you had the personality, you had the energy that people would covet. You're that concierge or Yoda or Merlin role, which is great because you got incredible influence. But it seemed like you made this massive career shift from sort of focusing on the public to focusing on the consumer.
Yeah, that was a big point of my life. I had to decide, and it came down to a speech I heard by Alan Gregg. Do you remember Alan? He was the number one pollster in Canada for sure, one of the top. And Alan gave a speech one night that said, as we increase the price to enter politics, and that price can be many things, right? Did you ever do anything wrong in high school? Did a member of your family do something? Did you smoke pot when you were younger? Were you drinking in public? Like the list could go on, Tony. He said, as we increase that price, there's an inverse relationship of the quality of people who will run for office. He was right. He predicted what has occurred today. The John Turners, the Brian Mulrooney's, and the Chrétiens and Paul Martins, they don't run anymore. Other than Mark Carney is the exception that we're seeing where someone of that caliber will come back and actually sacrifice everything to serve. I realized that I had a better opportunity for me and my family in the business career, but I could still contribute to politics by being a volunteer. And I spent the next 30 years giving my time as often as I could and never leaving that side of the political campaign aside.
So when we first met, and I'm trying to think of how many years ago, but it was Ginkgo you were running, which was this sort of direct marketing. And I'm curious how that came about.
When we signed the free trade agreement in 1987, my work in my mind was done. And I had a crossroads where you either stay in government, I was 27, or you go into a big corporation. And I came to the conclusion that I didn't want to do either one. I joined up with another young ad guy you knew, Irving Leibovitz. We took a small company of about 7 or 8 people and grew it to the largest Canadian independent agency. And that's really was when I realized I wanted to be an entrepreneur.
If it had been advertising, if you had bought an air conditioning company or had bought an automotive manufacturer, I have to believe you would have found the same success. It wasn't so much the sector you were involved with, it was just your ability to apply. I always call this combination of head, heart, and hands, the ability to understand the dynamics of the marketplace, have the empathy and heart to connect with the people that matter most to you, whether it was your employees or your customers, and this incredible bias for action. Is that fair, or do you think that advertising was your calling?
I'd like to think, when you hear that from a friend like you like to think that's fair and that you can apply that. And as I switched careers, I was able to take those same characteristics and be successful in other things other than advertising. But the main thing, Tony, why it was advertising, marketing, and media that people like you and I went into, but for me in politics, when you run a campaign, unlike, let's say, you were working for Pepsi as you did, the next day, if you win or lose on a campaign for Pepsi versus Coke, one gets 51% of market share, one gets 49. Everyone still makes a lot of money and you are still hired for the next number of years. In a political campaign, you get 40 days. At the end of it, whoever loses is gone. Everyone gets sent home. You're fired. The candidate's gone. And so it was all out. So there's an intensity and a focus and a win at all costs in politics that I could take to advertising, marketing, and help corporations and bring that intensity and that passion. And that's why I think it was more conducive to go to the advertising marketing side.
Perry, just a context for the listeners that, you talked about taking 7 people and growing it to one of the largest independent, but you had to win against some very established multinationals and a lot of clients that took great comfort in saying, well, that's our global agency, therefore it's my Canadian agency. And you found a way to change the status quo. And I'd love your advice on how you do it, because today we've been given some unprecedented opportunities and slingshots as the little guy, but you still have to know where to aim that rock.
You competed against those same multinationals, and we had the challenges. You had to focus on their weaknesses, their arrogance, their size. They were institutionalized. They couldn't make decisions as fast as we could. I remember one of the techniques we would use, Tony, is I would walk in and write a predated check for 1 year for the whole amount of our fees. And if we didn't successfully meet all the goals that we'd set together, they could cash that check. Now, as an owner-operator, I can make that decision. A big multinational, the president in Canada, could not. That kind of being more agile, a little quicker to think outside of the box and beat them at their own game.
You sold the business and you joined a multinational. How did that work out for you? Because to me, an entrepreneur might sell out because it's a great way to take some money off the table. But I know that when I sold my agency, the next day when I put the key into the door, it wasn't my door anymore. Psychologically, it was something I had to battle with. I was now beholden to others. And things like you were doing, writing that check if you weren't happy, had to change because now you were part of a bigger enterprise.
Yeah, Tony, that was never my mindset. I always walked in the next day like it was still my company. And I think that was the key why I ended up then in New York at head office with them. And now that because we buy companies where we do mergers, I hope the CEOs who roll equity with us feel the same way I did. I want them, just like I did, came in and go, just because the ownership has changed, it doesn't mean my drive and how to run this company. Now, they have a choice, obviously, and they can tell me that I'm wrong and change everything that I've done. But I think if you go into it with passion and innovation and the same drive, they're going to keep encouraging you. At least a good partner will. They're going to put fuel to the fire. That's what made that transition successful. And I always wanted to play on a bigger global platform, and that was my opportunity.
The next move you make on the chessboard is now, rather than me singing for the supper, I'm going to go in there and create a fund so that I can buy the diners. I can get involved with buying businesses. I'm curious how that came about, because once again, maybe there's some skill sets that you're bringing in your knapsack, but it is a different board that you're playing on.
Yeah, I think what I learned is after 3.5 years with them, the M&A and acquisition formulas and how to do it and the secret black box, it wasn't that difficult. That part was easy, the financial models. The hard part was building a relationship with a founder and then spending the time to do the integration and helping them grow. And I always felt that came natural to me and my partners at Behringer. So I just woke up one day and go, wait a minute, I can do this for myself or for with my partners and for my investors. And that's the path we took. We created Depencier because we believed we had a certain sector expertise that could bring more value, and we could focus on what we call at Depencier value creation, which is, I always tell everyone, don't sell your company to us if you're not willing to work with us side by side. If it's just money you want, there's other people who will do that. You sell your equity to us, you've now got a partner, an operating partner.
When did you start Depencier? When did you make that move, decide that you were going to go out and be in the business of acquiring diners?
2001, 2002, we came to that conclusion. There was Bill Kostenko and I had gotten together and thought, with Bill's incredible financial skills, which he was well known in Canada and our industry and many others to bankers, and my operating and strategic skills in the industry, we could do this together. And we built a team. As you remember, we brought Andrea Nickel in. She came from, I think at the time, Bain Consulting, and we just began to put together that we had the operational and insights and experience that others didn't.
Give us a snapshot of what you've accomplished, just so the audience could get a sense of how far you took this idea of bringing together this small group and applying not only financial acumen, but that sort of operating with a heart mentality that you bring.
It's been about 23 years. We started with approximately $25 million under management that we managed our money and other investors. And today, Depencier manages $1.1 billion. The focus there, we've built up a team, a great team of about 25 people that bring the expertise from financial to value creation, strategic experience, operational experience, banking backgrounds. And so we all come together to form, I think, a very capable organization. And we've proved it by the returns we've brought back to our investors.
This century, I would say, has not been kind. More often than not, we've been dealing with a lot of curveballs as a society. But I read in one of your articles that you said some of the best opportunities emerge during times of uncertainty. We're certainly living through one now. So provide some lessons in life for my listeners on, even though the storm clouds look dark, there's a silver lining in every cloud.
I'm a big believer in Canada. Yes, we've had some challenging let's say everyone talks about the lost decade. And while we fell behind in a number of measurements from, GDP and others, it was getting us ready for the shock to the system that we got after the elections in the US, the global tariff wars. And to me, that's an opportunity. We still have incredible resources, and I know it sounds repetitive, Tony, from what you're hearing in the media, but it's true. We first need to unlock every mega project in our country, from resources to transportation to others. That's number one. That matters. And the second is the Canadian entrepreneur. Help them build companies. We can sell the products and the services abroad. I just read a survey, and I'll send it to you. Canada came number one out of 78,000 respondents globally in terms of trust, all of the elements that you would need to build a company and a relationship. So Canada's number one, our brand. And I've watched some of your presentations about the Canada brand. And so here we are. If you start a company in Canada, you have a head start over every other country because of the brand. So when you show up on someone else's shore, you go to Europe, you go to Scandinavia, Australia, Singapore, they will take your meeting. They'll take you seriously because of the Canada brand. You have an advantage over your competitors. Now's the time to take advantage of it.
Don't go away, because when we return, Perry and I dive deeper into our conversation about Canada, our current mindset, and what we need to do to change the rhetoric. And of course, my 3 takeaways.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Investing in Canada, well, that matters to RBC. $500 billion in sustainable financing to combat climate change. $500 million for Future Launch, a 10-year program to prepare youth for the jobs of tomorrow. Helping to discover the next generation of Olympians, artists monetizing their talents, women entrepreneurs pursuing their dreams, supporting mental health, and so much more. Investing in Canada, well, that matters to RBC.
We're right now in our new fund focused on Canadian companies. And the reason is we think there are some great Canadian companies. And before US private equity firms, which are knocking on our doors, come and buy those companies and then take all the IP, all the expertise, and the head office down to the US, it's a chance for us Canadian investors to do that. I see it as nothing but opportunity.
Today, my special guest is my good friend Perry Miele, a serial entrepreneur, an investor, and Yoda to some of the most forward-thinking, data-driven marketers on the planet. Perry, we could spend the entire interview talking about your entrepreneurial skills, what you're doing with Depencier, lessons you learned in the political arena, but what I'm most interested in is your belief in turning uncertainty into certainty, and specifically as it applies to Canada, because there's a lot of people feeling like they're standing on shifting sand. But I know that what I read from you and what I hear from you is a completely different context. You think this is our time.
You and I grew up for 40 years. The center of the political and business spectrum was prime real estate. Everyone wanted it. And think of all the great prime ministers. They got elected by getting most of it. So for the last 10 years, the Liberals went hard left, the Conservatives went hard right, and prime real estate, kind of like Rosedale real estate, Yorkville, was left abandoned. Then you get Mark Carney shows up, looks at that incredible piece of real estate and said, no one wants this, I'll take it. And he camped out in the center. And I would argue he went slightly center-right, similar to what Clinton did in his second election. And that's why we now have more and more businesses, including conservative provincial leaders, getting behind him, not doing the let's fight each other. And so if Carney can keep to the center and bring everyone back, I think that is going to be the fuel to get this, jump-starting Canada, getting us all feeling more positive, more inspired to invest in companies, in growth, in people, and helping each other. I think that's where we're headed.
From Canada and Carney, I understand the sense of optimism. I agree that the center is what a fertile ground to bring people together. It's going to require, though, that people that have enjoyed their positions on the fringes, I'm not just talking politically, we can talk about special interest groups, we can talk about unions, we can talk about people who want to occupy the far right and the far left. All of them are going to have to return in some form to the middle ground if Carney's going to have the ability to not only sort of inspire change, but create the kind of impact this country needs.
First of all, just the fact that he got elected by going to the center was the first step that people took. Even if you look at some of the things that Pierre Poilievre has been saying, you see him slowly moving there in baby steps. So I just want to be careful. Harper in the first few elections, after he won the first one, began to sort of get closer to the center. He was always looking. He was a very logical prime minister and, read the country well and understood that he could not allow that his party to go too far right. And I just think that's where Canadians feel more comfortable. They don't mind going center right. Sometimes they don't mind going center left, but they always want one foot in the center. That's our safe zone.
So let's talk about now Canadians, because as we look at the forces of change, youth unemployment, infrastructure that's being challenged by sheer numbers, what advice can you bring to the individual that has them say, yes, these are times of uncertainty, but here's some of the things that I can do to turn sort of impossibility into possibility and negativity into positivity?
The first thing I would say, there's a book I share with many management teams and young people who join. I don't know if you've ever read it, Tony. It's called Endurance, and it's the journey of Shackleton, who in I think I got it right, 04 or 05, had the voyage to explore the Antarctic. And as soon as they arrive, the ship gets crushed and now they're in trouble. All the facts point that they should have expired down there, and that would have been the end of it. But the leadership lessons from Shackleton and how he rallied that team and over 2 years put together a plan to somehow get them all home safely is monumental. It's an inspiring story of leadership, why never to give up. And so that's the first thing. The second thing is I always try to encourage young people that you don't always have to go to a big corporation. Some of us, fit in there, but don't discount entrepreneurship. Don't discount smaller companies. Look for companies that have a culture that fit yours, it's a company that you're excited to go to work. And if you start with that part of positivity, then you're going to think in a more positive way about your country, about, hey, am I going to own a home one day? Can I get even close to the lifestyle my parents had in that generation? So it's got to start somewhere. And you know me, the glass is usually half full in my mind every day when I wake up.
So much of it is an attitude or a switch. I always said to my daughters, if you could find that switch and just turn it on, the difference between success and failure is, in sports, they call it being in the zone. We've been in business where we know we're not going to lose that pitch. We just feel it, the energy, the excitement, and you know that it's magnetic. Is there a way to bottle that?
Well, if it could be bottled, you and I would have our next business, Tony. That would be amazing. I don't have a good answer because I think that's a challenging question depending where you are, what is making you feel the way you do. And so maybe the answer, Tony, is you and I should be encouraging young people to find mentors. I was lucky that one of my mentors in my first job, Senator Marjorie LeBreton, was encouraging, tried to get me to be positive and think differently. You have to be exposed. Now, my father was an outgoing positive thinker. Not everyone has that environment. Maybe they don't come from a family where that encouragement is there for them. So where do you find it, Tony? I think you're going to have to find it outside and search for mentors or people who are willing to give you the time and effort to try to encourage you and give you the kinds of advice and insights that will make your life more successful.
I want to talk to you now about tightropes because you seem to love the fact that when you have to find a new tightrope, status quo takes hold, you get a little agitated. Next thing you know, you're off on a completely different mission. In this case with Behringer, you're really focusing on data, technology, things that would normally be reserved for those young bucks, the young men and women in Silicon Valley that Trump attached himself to in his inauguration. But you saying as a graybeard, I don't want to let this world go by. So talk to me about why that's important to you, finding that new territory, and how do you go about learning something when maybe this time the biases should be against you because you're an older guy as opposed to that new generation.
Well, let me quote someone who's a good friend. His name is Tony Chapman. He said to me about a year ago, I don't want when my grandchildren ask me, where were you during the AI revolution? I've been quoting you, Tony, about 20 times on that one, and I loved it. I think that's how I feel every time there's a shift of technology, industry shifts, our businesses change. I guess it's this feeling of missing an opportunity to play a role, even if it's a small role. And I think on the AI side, it's making sure we understand it well. The example I give is not that I want to be part of the newest AI GPT company, because that's like chasing gold. Out of the 5,000 people who ran up to the Yukon, maybe 5 found gold. But the money was made by the people who sold the shovels, the tents, the coffee, etc. And I think that where our skill set is making sure we can be in the AI ecosystem, helping companies use it to successfully sell their other products. I was just reading a great book. It's called The Company. It's the story of Hudson Bay. I was blown away of the history of Canada and how out in BC they made money when all these miners showed up. They heard about the Fraser River and the gold that was literally just in the river. And 1,000 people came. All those corporations, including the Hudson Bay Company, sold them a lot of equipment.
What's next? Is there ever a time in your life where you think you're going to stop and reflect and maybe share, teach, write a book? Or do you think that you're wired to be taking a file to bed, even if it might be the last night you spent on earth?
My wife would probably say the latter, what you just said, that she doesn't believe I'll ever stop working. And probably because I don't see it as work, Tony. And it's also when at some point that the people you work with, if they deem you irrelevant because you didn't stay up to date on AI, you weren't able to contribute, you're not mentoring anymore, you're not contributing in some way, at that point, it might be time to, retire and maybe go off and spend more time in the countryside of Canada or Italy and enjoy life. But right now, that's not in the cards.
Perry, I always wrap up my show with my 3 takeaways. And the first one is just an obvious lesson in life, but you said it so well, is find mentors. I think nowadays, I'm not sure the institutions really know what to teach yet because the world's changing so fast. And I'm not sure there's the kind of path that was laid out for us that will ever exist again, where, university education guaranteed you a job and 5 years later, your down payment on a house. It's a different world. But a mentor, I think, can certainly help. And you are, to me, one of the ultimate Yodas that I've ever met. At any time someone's ever asked you for advice, they wanted to share a story, you listened generously and answered appropriately, sometimes with advice that they were seeking, and other times just a shoulder for somebody to lean on. Second thing I love is this sense of FOMO. You have the ultimate fear of missing out. When we came along and we think about the days that you and I were around at the beginning of the internet and email and slides were the medium of choice and all the different inventions along the way. And then AI comes along and next thing you know, Perry Miele is once again raising a fund and wants to be part of it. We're being blessed to be such change in this world. And I think that you've been blessed to understand that surfing those waves is where life happens. And then the last one, which is such a beautiful lesson in life because we always tend to chase the star at the top of the tree, is don't forget that there's a lot that can happen in the business of selling shovels. It changes around us, opportunities around us, but sometimes it's not trying to be the next Facebook or Instagram or .com billionaire, but just understanding what can I do to help. And in your days, it started with citizens and then became consumers, and now it becomes people that you're investing in. How can I help them get to where they need, want, and deserve to go? And I wrap up the entire show saying you do that better than anybody else because of your FOMO, because you are a naturally gifted and born Yoda, because I think you truly understand that there's opportunity in meeting people when they need a tent versus chasing the nugget in the river. So for all of that and more, my friend, it's long overdue that I had you on Chatter That Matters, and I appreciate you being part of it.
Yes, Tony, thank you. And I appreciate those generous comments.
Joining me now is a friend of the show, a friend of mine, Alan Depencier. He's the Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for their small business portfolio. Alan, welcome back to Chatter That Matters.
Hey, Tony. Good to see you.
We're doing a series on small business in October because we all know they are the oxygen of our economy. They breathe life, innovation, jobs, energy. When I say small business to you, to RBC, what comes to mind?
Small business just brings a lot of positive emotions to me personally. My family's had a small business. My grandfather started a business. My father ran it. I was a small business owner at one point. When I think of small businesses, you think of the storefront or you think of that business in the community. But what it really is really around, the people behind the business. It's about the resiliency, the courage to take that first step, being resourceful and really being kind of just the heart of the community.
How do we open people's eyes to the fact that very often with a small business owner, their life and livelihood is woven together. They're going all in. So with it, there's a different level of pressure, intensity, and energy. Letting everybody in Canada realize that makes us maybe more accountable to seeing them succeed.
The thing that makes a small business really successful is the ability to wear so many different hats, right? Like, one day you're waking up and you're the head of the sales, and the next day you wake up, you're head of operations, or that I shouldn't even say the next day. In the same day, you're wearing all these different hats. And the people that truly make that leap into a small business, you really have to applaud them. It's a big jump. And it's that kind of what I like to say, perseverance is really what makes them successful. Is, they've got to build the business on many fronts, and it's not a straight line to success in most cases.
I read some alarming statistics is that there's less entrepreneurs today than there was in the past. What do we need to do as a country to create the conditions and circumstances that help them make the leap by saying, yeah, it is a jump, but it's a jump you can make with the help of Canada, with the help of organizations like RBC?
If you kind of compare the U.S. versus Canada, I think in the U.S. they just have a mindset in celebrating small businesses. It's like, I'd like to see more of that in Canada. I'd like to see, the government, large corporations, as well as even like universities and colleges and other educational institutions, like really drive and encourage folks to drive small businesses and entrepreneurship. If you think about it, like 98% of all businesses in Canada are small and medium-sized enterprises. They're the ones that are driving the economy, and we need more of that.
I've had many newcomers on my show, and many of them actually have started a small business and with the intent of passing it on to the next generation. How difficult is it to pass the torch from one generation to another?
The thing about family businesses is you have many dynamics that would be different than you would have in a more larger corporation that's, has shareholders and stuff like that. So, a big part of what RBC offers is helping folks through that transition, because there's the rational side of it and the steps you need to go through, but there's the emotional side. There's that emotional. One of the biggest things comes back to trust, right? Like, is the generation that started the business, are they willing to pass it on to the next generation? Do they trust them? Do they give them control?
Let's talk more about RBC, because I know that putting you in the position they've put you in is because there's a real commitment to small business. Talk to me a little bit about what RBC can do to help people that dream do, and those that do scale their business.
If you think about the life stage of a business, there's the starting phase and there's the growth stage. And as we just talked about, at some point, there's that transition stage. So, we really look at helping small business no matter what stage of that journey they're in. If you're starting a business, it's a series of firsts, whether it's opening your first account, what account do I get, is about how do I finance my business. Big part of RBC too is because we do bank a lot of small businesses and large businesses, is like connecting them with others that have gone through similar experiences. And then we have tools online. We have things like business plan builders, and we have a whole hub around starting a small business. We've created this whole capability called Beyond Banking, because we found a lot of our customers, not only did they want banking services, but they also wanted help on those other things. So for example, there's a venture that we started called Owner, which is really around helping you register or incorporate your business and make that seamless.
Alan, one of the things I'm always fascinated with is speed. And an entrepreneur has to work at a certain speed. How do you match the speed of and the appetite of an entrepreneur with the realities of running a big business? How do you connect the two so that people know that we can be at the pace you need us to be?
Our clients don't judge us versus other banks. They would judge us versus other companies that they deal with, and just that overall client experience and the simplicity and the speed of getting decisions, or the speed allowing to things. So we've invested heavily over the last few years. In fact, we're rolling out this new digital platform called RBC Edge, which is really this modern platform to allow you to managing your banking online and to make payments. If you want to grow internationally, it has new services to manage cross-border banking, really making it easy for them to have, it's almost like a control panel for their business where they can actually do the things they need to do without actually having to pick up the phone or go into a branch. So I think that's something we're continually innovating in. And then I think as you get into areas around more complex decisions, like around, maybe it's financing your business, that's where things like AI tools and pieces are going to be components of a future state for RBC in terms of helping get those decisions made, to kind of speed up those decisions. We're also looking at how do we make it easy for them to look at other sources of financing. So we have a partnership with like Grant Match, which makes it easier for small business to learn about grants that are available and make it easy for them to apply and qualify for other sources of financing. So a big part of the mission of RBC around small business and just businesses in general is really make it easier for them, be much more proactive versus them having to ask. Because they're wearing the many different hats, they don't have time to always pick up the phone all the time.
One piece of advice, if you could just wave a magic wand and offer advice to people that just have this itch to start a business, what would it be?
You just have to start. Of course, you got to do your research on the market opportunity, and you got to be realistic about startup costs and cash flow projections, because most people underestimate that stuff. But at the end of the day, once you've done that, Don't be afraid to take that leap and really pursue your passion. It's going to be scary and it's going to be uncertain, but that's the common trait is the folks made that jump. But you really want to surround yourself with good advice and support. Talk to other entrepreneurs and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it.
You use the word don't be afraid, but when I talk to small business owners, they're often intimidated about talking to their bank just because there's maybe vernacular and language they don't understand, like EBITDA. You're putting numbers on top of their dream. How do you find a way to have a common language so an entrepreneurs can come in there and open up about their dreams and challenges so that you in fact can become an advisor to them?
Well, I think you have to think of banks as this incredible opportunity for entrepreneurs. Our folks wake up every day wanting to help our clients and helping them succeed, and they don't get any more value in life than wanting the passion of helping others. So I think, think of them as a positive opportunity to help you. They can connect you. They also can guide you based on what's available. They can point you in the right direction on many fronts. They're almost a gateway into the various resources within RBC. So I would almost take the mindset of don't be intimidated by banks. I know they're big organizations. They seem intimidating, but they really do want to help you. And what do you got to lose? Just ask.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.